We are diving deep today into one of the most celebrated and I think often misunderstood books in history, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Mhm.
And let's just start with a provocative question. Here we have this image of the philosophical emperor, the paragon of Stoicism, talking about noble suffering and inner peace,
Right.
all while he's presiding over a massive slave-holding empire built on brutal, constant warfare. So can a personal manual for virtue really be moral if it sidesteps the systemic injustice that, well, finances his entire philosophical project?
That is the central tension of this critique. It really is. And it's a tension we have to confront head on.
Yeah.
We believe that some books must be challenged, and Meditations absolutely demands a rigorous assessment. This critique uses a step-by-step critical thinking framework that maps claims to evidence.
Okay.
We also apply an intellectual framework, and we use the Golden Rule and the U.S. preamble to identify these ethical asymmetries. Then we wrap it all up with a logical analysis for a balanced conclusion.
And as we navigate these complex layers of history and philosophy, just remember that you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for a deeper, more dynamic book critique.
Meditations is not some systematic philosophical treatise that was designed for public consumption or teaching.
No, not at all.
It's a private notebook.
Exactly. We are essentially reading the diary of the most powerful man on the planet at the time. These are 12 books of personal notes Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in Greek somewhere between 171 and 175 CE. And he was often on these punishing, cold military campaigns on the empire's northern frontiers, dealing with constant threats and administrative nightmares. It's his personal psychological toolkit.
That's a great way to put it.
It's filled with reminders on core Stoic themes like reason, duty, and that inescapable truth of mortality.
And that context really informs the central Stoic proposition he was leaning on every single day. The idea that the mind can remain fundamentally free, rational, and undisturbed no matter what happens outside it.
So the Stoic definition of control is incredibly narrow then.
Extremely narrow. Everything external, whether that's your health, your personal status, how much money you have, or even the success of the empire, is deemed indifferent compared to inner virtue.
So if I'm hearing that right, the book's function for Marcus wasn't to solve political problems,
Right.
but to manage his own emotional response to them. It's a series of brief slogans and meditations designed to take raw, powerful emotion, anger over a betrayal, grief over a loss, fear of a military defeat, and instantly reframe it.
Reframe it into acceptance and disciplined goodwill toward others. It's a kind of radical self-therapy.
It is radical.
It is. And the enduring value proposition, which is why it's still so popular, is precisely that.
Yeah.
You have a man at the absolute apex of imperial power
Right, the top of the pyramid.
who is systematically downgrading the importance of that very power, wealth, and reputation. He's insisting to himself over and over that only just, reasonable conduct matters. He's actively telling himself to ignore the trappings of empire while simultaneously running it.
Okay, so let's unpack the logical building blocks here. If you're going to use this book as a guide, you need to understand the four-point foundation he keeps returning to. The first is metaphysical. The universe is a rational, ordered whole.
Yes, and it's permeated by a common concept they called logos. And we should pause and define logos clearly because it is the linchpin of the whole system.
Yeah, it's not quite what we mean by logic today.
Not at all. Think of it as the universal operating system or
Mhm.
the divine reason, the rational governing principle of the entire cosmos. Everything that happens, good or bad, is part of this rational whole.
So the consequence of believing in that rational universe is what defines human nature, and that's the second proposition.
Yeah.
Humans fulfill their true nature as rational and social beings by acting in accordance with that universal reason. And that means acting justly, courageously, wisely, and with self-control. For Marcus, virtue is the only genuine good.
Everything else is just wallpaper. And this is where the therapy really kicks in, which leads to the third proposition, the boundary of control.
Okay.
Since the universe is rational, we have to accept the things that happen as necessary. External events, a plague, a war, a frustrating senator, are entirely beyond our control. This is the foundation of resilience.
But doesn't that sound a bit like learned helplessness? If everything external is indifferent and the universe is rational, what stops that resilience from turning into apathy? It seems like you're teaching people to accept the yoke.
That's the tension we need to examine later, and it's a critical point. But for the Stoic, the boundary is sharp. What remains up to us is our judgment, our intention, and our choice of response.
So you can't control the traffic jam, but you control your reaction to it.
Precisely. You control your interpretation of it. It's a therapy for maintaining agency under extreme constraint.
And finally, that rational framework imposes a huge social imperative. That's the fourth pillar.
A huge one. Marcus constantly insists that each person is part of a larger human community. We are not solitary players. We must act for the common good rather than for private advantage.
He repeats that mantra all the time. We are citizens of a shared rational city, and we must not wrong one another.
That social duty is palpable throughout the notes. He even views his own role as emperor through this very lens, a duty to serve the common good, working without complaint and accepting insult or ingratitude without retaliation.
He sees himself as a servant to the whole.
Despite his title, yes, a servant to the rational whole.
Okay, so now we have to zoom out and look at the whole system from a critical perspective. This is where the picture gets really complicated for me.
Mhm.
If he believes so firmly in universal reason and the equality of all rational souls, why don't we see that translated into the laws and institutions of the empire he was running?
This is the ethical asymmetry. It's the elephant in the room. The tension is fascinating.
Yeah.
The same mind that affirms universal human kinship, that all humans share the logos, is the same mind that presides over a slaveholding, brutalizing empire.
An empire whose inequality provided the wealth and leisure that allowed him the time to write these meditations in the first place.
Exactly. So what does this all mean when we apply our modern ethical frameworks? When we look at this through the standpoint of the Golden Rule, treat others as you wish to be treated, or the ideals in the U.S. preamble. Liberty, general welfare?
Well, the Stoic inwardness starts to look like a way of normalizing terribly unjust structures.
Precisely. It happens by relocating freedom entirely inside the skull. Freedom becomes purely internal. It's divorced from the necessity of shared institutions and concrete legal rights.
So you can be spiritually free while literally being in shackles.
Yes. And that framework minimizes the urgency for political and structural reform because you've already found your sanctuary internally.
Ethically, the book shines when Marcus applies that rigor to his own impulses, his anger, his vanity, his self-pity, but it's largely silent on the moral status of the empire itself.
Silent on the conquered peoples, on the millions of non-citizens who didn't share his political protections. There's almost no grappling with the moral dimensions of slavery.
And that silence matters. It matters profoundly.
It really does. A philosophical framework that prizes the equality of rational souls but leaves legal and material inequality unchallenged, leaving the status quo of slavery and military dominance intact. It falls far short of a fully egalitarian, brotherhood-centered ethic. It's an internal morality that fails the external test of justice.
This feels like a natural place to invite a mindful moment to sort of take the temperature of these ideas.
Good idea.
Pause on one short passage or theme. Let's say Marcus's insistence that other people's faults are either not really harms or just opportunities to act justly. And ask yourself, how would this principle change the way you respond to a real person who has power over you or who is part of an unjust system?
That kind of reflective pause is what turns the book from a simple comfort object into a true philosophical mirror. It exposes where inner serenity supports necessary action and where it might just drift into quietism. On Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, and podcasts, inspiring reflection and rational thought, we frame this as an invitation. Don't just admire Marcus's composure.
No, you have to test it.
Test it against your own commitments to equality, to shared flourishing, and to critical inquiry.
We want you to see that genuine philosophy isn't about suppressing feeling. It's about aligning feeling, reason, and action with the goal of creating a world where everyone has the basics needed to thrive, not just the philosophical emperor.
Right. So moving on to the practical side, we absolutely have to acknowledge that many modern readers, from CEOs to athletes, turn to meditations and use it very successfully as a portable toolkit for daily life, for stress reduction and mental stability.
Yes, and this is where the distinction between using the book as a critical starting point versus treating it as a final destination becomes crucial.
Used critically, Stoic discipline can stabilize your emotions so that you have more clarity and energy to pursue social and political reform, not less. Think of it as emotional bulletproofing.
Okay, I like that.
It gives you the composure you need to engage in those hard, protracted external fights against injustice without being destroyed by anger or frustration.
But the danger, as we've identified, is treating acceptance and this indifference to externals as an excuse to tolerate injustice, rather than a strategy to stay steady while resisting it.
That's the slide into quietism.
Right. If you just accept poverty or war or systemic bias as part of the rational whole, where's the motivation to change anything? That's what makes Stoicism so problematic when it's applied systemically.
So we have to extract the useful methodologies, the techniques that actually work, while keeping our eyes wide open to the structural failures. And Marcus provides specific, practical techniques that still work today, especially in dealing with modern anxiety.
Okay, like number one, reframing setbacks. He constantly urges you to see difficulties, insults, or minor catastrophes not as personal harms,
Right.
but as tests of character and opportunities for justice or patience. If you have a terrible boss who insults your work, the event itself is neutral. Your response, your choice to remain patient or to address the issue rationally, that's everything.
The obstacle becomes the way forward.
Exactly.
And number two, the consistent habit of morning resolve and evening review. Marcus repeatedly urges rising in the morning and committing to rational action, reminding himself of his duties as a rational and social being.
And then reviewing it at night.
Then, in the evening, he conducts a review, examining his thoughts and conduct to maintain that strict discipline. You could apply that to any modern goal, whether it's sticking to a diet or pursuing a difficult project.
And number three, training attention on the present moment and the brevity of life. This is meant to loosen our attachment to status, to possessions, and to future worries. He frequently asks, what is this thing in itself?
Stripping it down.
He strips away the ego and social meaning. A fancy meal is just a dead animal. A luxurious road is just sheep's hair. If life is short, spend your attention on what's truly necessary and rational right now, not on things that will be forgotten in a week.
Our goal in this deep dive was really to move beyond a mere summary and toward a reflective judgment. We identified where the book's arguments cohere and provide genuine psychological strength, and where they conflict with a modern commitment to universal freedom and equality. The point is showing how you, the learner, can repurpose its psychological strengths while deliberately refusing its systemic blind spots.
And this critique draws on structured, critical thinking methods that map claims to evidence. We interrogate assumptions using high ethical standards like the Golden Rule and constitutional ideals, and we integrate classical philosophical analysis with contemporary ethical concerns.
Right.
These frameworks allow us to honor the text's brilliance while holding it accountable to our shared modern commitment to human dignity and flourishing for everyone.
So we'll leave you with one final thought to mull over. If Marcus Aurelius had applied the same penetrating rigor he used on his own vanity, fear, and anger to the actual structures of his empire, to the legality of slavery, to the moral purpose of perpetual conquest, would we be reading a fundamentally different kind of Stoicism today?
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally. See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.